Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the SoFin Podcast, part of the FinServe Marketing Podcast Network. This week on the show, I'm joined by Roger Pine, one of the co-founders of Holistiplan, a fintech solution that eases the pain of the tax planning process for financial advisors. In similar fashion to Matt Reiner of Benjamin, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, Roger was working in a family financial advisory business when he saw the opportunity to leverage technology to make something more efficient. And Holistiplan was born. There's a lot more to the story, and that's why we're doing this podcast. Anyway, Holistiplan is really innovative, and Roger is a really bright entrepreneur. I think you're going to love this story. By the way, Roger was introduced to me by the team at Benzinga. And as you've heard me say a few times on this show, Benzinga hosts the Global FinTech Awards coming up in November. And a couple of months ago, you had Jason Raznick on this show, the founder of Benzinga, and we talked about the power of events for the FinTech space. So really cool stuff there. Holistiplan is nominated for an award in the category of Best New Product. So make sure you go, after you listen to this podcast, by the way, go to the Benzinga FinTech Awards and vote up Holistiplan. Good stuff. If you haven't done so already, make sure you check out the FinTech Awards and nominate your company. If you are running a FinTech company or working at a FinTech company, you're going to want to do that. And if you're just thinking about registering because you want to attend either the live or the online event, make sure you use the code SoFinVIP, SoFinVIP, to get a discount. All right, before we get to the conversation with Roger, make sure you check out the other podcasts on the network. Over on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast by Truelytics, we're diving into the use of storytelling as a tool for financial advisors to close more business and to win M&A deals. That's a big deal. Yeah, M&A deals are a big deal right now. There are an estimated 50 buyers for every advisor who is looking to sell his or her business. So storytelling can be a really good edge for a buyer who wants to win the deal. We have George McAllister of the Next Level Solution on the show, and he shares several timely techniques and strategies for constructing and using stories in your business. It's really fascinating, so definitely check that out. Speaking of M&A deals, check out the Advisor Financing Forum podcast by Skyview Partners next week for a fantastic conversation with Nick Arellano of Your Legacy Partners, a boutique M&A advisory firm based in LA. While our conversation revolves around the market for RIAs and financial advisory practices, Nick and his team work with other verticals as well and other business types. So a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is really valuable regardless of where you are in business. So definitely check that out. And, look, if you're interested in buying a business, maybe reach out to Nick and his team. Okay. You can find all the podcasts on the network at finservemarketing.com/podcast. You made it really easy. Just click the tile for the podcast you're interested in, and it'll bring you to the page where the podcast resides. Okay. All right. Let's get to it with Roger Pine of Holistiplan. Well, Roger, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you on the show. I'm so glad that Kelsey from Benzinga put us together. So welcome to the show, buddy.
Yes, thank you. Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's always really fun when you start talking to somebody, you realize you have a lot of chemistry with the person. They're doing some stuff that you're really interested in and fascinated by. So I thought maybe we could start with the traditional elevator pitch to kind of level set everybody on what is Holistiplan and what is it doing for people?
Sure. Okay. So Holistiplan, we're a software as a service company aimed at financial planners, financial advisors, and we help them do tax planning. We do it by removing about literally 95% of the work associated with doing some of that tax planning. So an advisor will upload a tax return, a PDF tax return, and we use optical character recognition software to read it in. We do a bunch of analysis on it. We give the advisor, within seconds, some talking points and a whole branded report to share with their client. And so a task that normally takes 45 minutes to an hour is now 45 seconds. And then we have some tools following that to kind of dig in further and do more analysis for the advisor. So we've been at it for about 1.5 years, and we really caught fire in the marketplace. People were looking for a new way to do tax planning.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, you are the second tax-related startup that I've had on the show. So I'm really excited to kind of geek out on this type of stuff. Now, I'm not an accountant. By no stretch of the imagination am I a tax expert. I know enough to go be dangerous, right? I studied finance in school and I pay taxes. So there's that. Yep. We had Tax Taker on the show. Actually, one of the first episodes of this podcast was Tax Taker. Ari Palmer, the founder and CEO there. And Tax Taker makes it possible for startups and other companies, but primarily their target market is startups, to go and claim tax credits for their R&D. We nerded out on that type of stuff. And she talked about some of the same mentality that you're coming at this with, some of the same inspiration. This is really labor intensive if you have to do it manually, right? So tax planning, really the initial part of getting the data in to the system, whatever system the financial planner or advisor is using, is somewhat labor intensive. So it's really interesting to me. What was the big aha moment there for you, or series of moments that led you to make Holistiplan a reality? Because obviously you could have done anything, right? I mean, you were working at a financial planning firm, right?
Right. That's right.
And it was a family business too. There's a lot of comfort there in that type of deal. So I'm really curious, what was your inspiration for like, you know what, I need to do this tech startup thing?
There's no aha moment. Like it's an aha, 5 or 6 years. Yeah, I mean, I worked in a financial planning firm. We were dealing with high net worth clients. And that's an important thing to mention, because the type of planning that we wish that everybody could get, when a lot of people go into the profession of financial planning, they do it because they want to help people. And a lot of times they want to help ordinary people like them. And what you find pretty rapidly, we talked about just the labor intensiveness of tax planning, but all financial planning is like the least scalable thing you can do in any financial services business, because you got to spend a lot of time. You got to talk to your client for a long time to learn about them. You got to analyze these documents. And that's why, because it's so not scalable, it's why really the only people who can afford it are the people who are high net worth. And so the only firms that are really doing very deep financial planning are the ones for the clients who can pay this premium for. And that didn't sit well with me as a financial planner. I wanted to get to the remaining 99% of the population who needed this stuff. And so, within my own firm, we worked on, as you do in your own firm, you try to work on ways to be more efficient. And I was a self-taught programmer and started building tools that we used within the firm. But then I said, I want to bring financial planning to more people. And so I made a choice to leave that firm. You're right. It is a family business. So my wife actually still runs that firm. So it's still in my blood, in my family. But I went off to try to figure out, how do we make financial planning scalable, and scalable to the point where it's accessible to more people, to that remaining 99% of the population, who, by the way, need financial planning probably more than investment management. If you've got, I get this all the time. People will come to me and they'll say, I've got $5,000 saved up. How should I invest that? And, my answer is like, it doesn't totally matter. If you work, study, and get an extra 1 or 2% return on your $5,000 account, that's what, $50, $100? Whereas if you spend that same amount of time learning about how to make better decisions, how to save smarter, how to optimize your taxes, your return is going to be way bigger than $50 to $100. I can guarantee that. And so that's the irony, is that the people who need financial planning the most are the ones who have the least access to it. And it's only when you get to become a multimillionaire when, yes, it actually matters. Getting that 1 or 2 extra % of alpha in your portfolio matters, because those are big dollars. In essence, they subsidize the financial planning by paying for investment management, which scales well. So anyway, that was the problem that I faced. And I spent a year in the wilderness trying to figure that out, failing miserably, by the way. So idea one was a technology I thought of it's actually very scalable, and it's an old technology. It's been around a long time. It's called writing a book. Right? I mean, it's like you can take all your knowledge about financial planning, drop it into a book, and you do it one time, and then you can print 20,000 of them, and you've helped 20,000 people, right? But anyone you talk to who writes a book says it's the worst thing they ever did. So that didn't sound fun. And then also, it's the least lean startup way of creating a product that there is, right? You do all the development, push out the product, and only then do you know if there's a market for that product. So that kind of bugged me. So then I tried a direct-to-consumer software type thing, where you just kind of go through a choose your own adventure sort of style way of building a financial plan. And that did not take off at all. I found myself building a lot of educational content rather than planning content into that product. And people just don't want to sit through 15 hours of learning about what a Roth IRA is and what the tax advantages are. They want someone to help them just do it for them. And so this year, 2019, I joined with another financial planner, my co-founder, and I started building these concepts, and we're Holistiplan. It was meant to be all tax, estate, insurance, but we really landed on tax because it touches every part of your life, And also, you mentioned it, you file a tax return, I file a tax return. We all have to, by law, every single year. And so it's a great engagement opportunity for financial advisors. And so we pivoted to serving financial advisors, and we decided to focus on tax, and that's where we've been. And like I said, it's a great way for an advisor to take a standardized document. It's not like reading a will where the language is different every time. A tax return looks the same. Well, the forms are the same for everybody. And every year, it's a new engagement opportunity with clients. And it's a great way to show value, demonstrate value other than, what did my portfolio do this week? And so that's where we landed on. And credit to my partner for figuring out that the OCR would save a lot of time. And he didn't want to enter all that data. He said, figure out how a way to do this. And so we did. We figured out the OCR piece.
That's really smart about that is on so many levels. Number one, identifying the notion that, hey, this is a need here. Like there is a segment of the population that's not being served well. And it's not because they aren't potentially a profitable segment to service. Many of the reasons why certain segments of the population aren't being served is because they just can't be served profitably. But there are lots of people who are coming to financial advisors and looking for a level of service, looking for some guidance on some things. However, if it were going to be delivered in the traditional financial planning price point, they might not be able to afford it, right? And that's where you get into a lot of commission financial advisors, selling on commission and so forth, because that's the way they can afford to service that client. But in this case, what I like is, number one, you're bringing the price way down for individuals to get it. And you're solving a real problem. Like you said, everybody files taxes. And if you have that $5,000, hell, even let's go with $100,000, right? You make 10% on a $100,000 portfolio, you make $10,000 in a year. That is really, it's good, right? But if you move the needle, again, 1%, as you mentioned, we're talking $1,000 there. Chances are there's more than $1,000 of value, real economic value to the end client to be found with proper tax planning.
Absolutely true.
That's where you're bringing a lot of service to the client. And to your point in the book, I've got this issue with financial wellness startups. I always have a hard time with them because the reality is most people aren't self-starters. They are not going to do it themselves on stuff. There is a small segment of humans who will, just like there's a relatively small segment of the population who will go and work out and stay in shape on their own with no other outside motivation to do so. There's another chunk of folks who need a trainer, right? There's a reason why the Peloton is taking off so well. It's a really cool exercise equipment thing, but it's the screen and this classes that get people excited and stay committed to that type of thing. So I love what you've done here. You're making it scalable and accessible. It gives the advisor the ability to have a tool and save him or her a lot of time as well. So really, really cool stuff.
Yeah. And that was the big change is that, I wanted to go direct to consumer, but I realized that if I want to make this impact, I have to go through advisors. And so, my goal when starting was I want to be able to impact 1,000 people. My firm had 250 clients and I kind of pulled 1,000 out of my head. I said, if my life's work is I'm going to try to help 1,000 people get financial planning who wouldn't otherwise have access to it. And just a little over a year into Holistiplan, we now are almost signing up our 1,000th firm, each of whom has their own book of clients, right? And so I think that's just proven that we get way more leverage. I've been able to do many times over my wildest dreams for end clients who've been impacted by going to advisors rather than direct to consumer.
I love that. It's funny. I'm glad you volunteered that piece of information because that is something I haven't yet started working into this podcast as I'm interviewing entrepreneurs, right? I have not started asking the probing question about tell me about the traction you have so far. Because I'll be a little gentle on that, right? Because especially if a startup, you mentioned it's about a year and a half old, right? Yeah. I was like, look, traction's hard. Traction is really hard in this space. It just is, right? Especially selling into the financial planner, the financial advisory space is difficult, right? Because financial advisors are notoriously frugal. And that's a nice way of saying they have alligator arms when it comes time to spend money on stuff often. They don't like to invest in tech too often. It's not that they're afraid of technology, but it takes a lot of convincing to get them to reach into their wallet very frequently, just in my experience. But also there's a growth curve, right? There's an adoption curve. Like, okay, I bought this piece of tech. Now I got to learn how to use it. I got to work it into my workflow and all that type of stuff. So you're doing great. 1,000 firms almost here or just crossed that barrier. How have you navigated the challenges of selling into the space? What's that process look like for you guys?
Well, I guess I'll probably jinx it by saying this, but it's been pretty smooth, honestly. And I
Wow.
think we got a really good bump at the beginning. So really, we kind of left our paid beta phase in September of last year. We won a competition at the XY Planning Network has a fintech competition, and we won that in September. And that gave us a good bump. I think a lot of early adopter types tried out the software then. Fortunately, have stayed with the software. And then, your goal then is to try to get your middle tier of advisors to sign up. I don't know. Yeah, it's been pretty smooth. I think one thing that helped is how much people have to do tax. You got to do it every year. I mean, advisors are already doing this, and we're not asking them to change a workflow too drastically. And they're already doing tax planning, usually on some spreadsheet, and we're just making it easier for them. Or alternatively, we have some people on the platform who were not doing tax planning previously, and we're giving them a way to do that. And they don't have to build all that infrastructure. They don't have to build the checklists and the Excel spreadsheets that, a larger firm like my firm I was in previously have to build over time. I guess we've been lucky in that sense that we kind of slot pretty easily into people's existing workflows. Now, that said, I mean, as we start to move into the enterprise space, it gets harder because they have their own purchasing departments and compliance you got to go through just like any other software. But that's a slower cycle. But I don't know, we're getting there. And like I said, I don't want to jinx it, but so far it's been pretty smooth.
That's great. You know what? Anybody who's listening, make sure you go to the Holistiplan website, holistiplan.com, and check out the video there. There's a little quick introductory video of the solution. And I love the fact that in there, you're like, this video has not been sped up. It's real time. And there is that built in, like, okay, you clicked upload and there's a wait and you're kind of watching it. It's like, okay, what's going to happen now? And it goes pretty darn quick. I didn't actually time it. I didn't click, was that 30 seconds? Was that a minute? What was that? But it does go pretty quick, but it really gives a very fast demonstration, and it just hits you like, oh, that was easy, right? And it solves a problem that I have, because if I have, I don't know what a typical financial planner has. I know on the investment advisor side, it's fairly common to maybe have 100 clients tops, 150 absolutely max for an individual advisor. But let's just say it's 100. If you've got to do 100 tax plans in a year for your clients, that level of like, that was quick. Your eyes go open like, that's worth paying for. You just saved me hours and hours and hours, or thousands and thousands of dollars, because you're basically paying somebody else to do this, right? You're either doing it yourself or you're paying somebody on your clerical staff to do this for you. It has to get in there some way. So having the ability for an individual advisor to click upload and it does it is pretty rocking.
Right. Yeah. I think they kind of have both ends of the spectrum. The larger, more like enterprise firms who probably already have a pretty robust tax planning capability in-house built up, they're buying us for the efficiency gain. Because like you said, even if it's not the advisor doing that work, they have some staff member running through a checklist that they've built in 30 to 45 minutes, and then back and forths of creating the deliverable and stuff like that. So they're looking at it from just an efficiency time savings perspective. I think the equally, maybe 50% of the people who sign up for our product are those who maybe haven't built up that capability yet. They might be new to planning, or their firms are just starting to layer in planning and they've been traditionally investment management only. And they're buying it not necessarily for the efficiency, but just for this body of knowledge that they get to have out of the box that's been built up over many years and tested by all these advisors. Like we're getting two pretty different business cases coming from different firms as to why they're signing up for the product. But in the end, in the long run, I mean, we're adding scalability to financial planning, which wasn't there before. So that's the piece I'm excited about.
Yeah, I love it. And this is the type of stuff where I personally get really excited. I talk about this a lot. I would refer to Holistiplan as a driver technology, right? So this is not customer-facing technology. And for many people, this is not sexy stuff, but it is the stuff behind the sexy stuff that makes it easier. And it's going to free an advisor up to really focus on what they do best, right? Managing the client, helping the client achieve their goals, right? Educating the client, instead of spending all of their time doing data entry and trying to figure some of this stuff out on their own. So I really, really love it. Are you running a fintech firm or other business that sells into financial advisory businesses like RIAs and broker-dealers? If so, you should consider having us produce a podcast for you on the FinServ Marketing Podcast Network. The concept is simple. We are building a network of shows for non-competing companies with an aim of reaching a large, highly targeted audience. It's niche marketing like a boss. The collaborative ecosystem is sure to create deep connections for you and your business with the advisors and executives and influencers on the space who listen to the podcast on the network. If you'd like to explore having us produce your show, simply go to finsermarketing.com and click Take Action. It's right underneath the network effect. Or you can just email me. I'm at mike@finsermarketing.com. Okay, now back to the conversation with Roger Pine. You mentioned earlier on that you were a self-taught coder. You started tinkering around with code and doing stuff for the firm before Holistiplan. What languages and tech solutions did you use to build? Or what was that process like for you?
So I studied engineering in college. I was an electrical engineer. So I had like one or two intro courses, and I would learn what an if statement is. They would try to teach me what recursion is, and I never really understood it and still don't understand what recursion is. So I had some background to it, but I've never built a thing. I never built a product. And I'm really serious about my New Year's resolutions. Like I really think about them. I'll spend about 2 months really planning for what my New Year's resolution is going to be. And then I tell people about it to hold myself accountable. And so, yeah, about 6-7 years ago, my resolution was I want to be able to build web applications, learn how to code and build those things. So I learned Python as the language I use. I use the Django framework. Obviously, these days you got to learn your JavaScript and some of the we use Vue. I really liked Vue on the front end. But yeah, I started building things. The way to learn is to build things, right? I mean, you can, in the classroom, it only takes you so far. And so I started building things for my family, like a web-based grocery list application, and then a web-based garage door opener. But then I started building things for the firm, some of our trading systems, and then some of our billing systems. And that really gave me the foundation to be able to go out and build a product. And obviously, it's different when you open something up out to the open world versus something internal. And I've added contractors. We have a CTO who is way better at this stuff than me, but we really had a leg up by having a technical co-founder to be able to quickly iterate a product and get something ramped up. I think it really gave us a head start of maybe 6 to 9 months over if we had tried to build it out by building the dev team first instead of having it in-house.
Really, really neat. What are some of the big coding hurdles you encountered? Like, because I'm a self-taught coder as well, Ruby on Rails. I built some cool stuff. I really enjoyed the process because, as you said, you want to be able to get in there and build something. You want to like put your hands in it, right? It's kind of like it's the difference between eating food and having cooked food, right? There's something very rewarding about it, like understanding how it works. Even if I don't want to be a coder as my primary thing I do in life, of course, but I like knowing that I can do something if I had to. But I imagine along the way, because you weren't a professional, you must have hit some pretty significant hurdles along the way that you had to overcome.
The OCR technology is, and will always be a challenge. When we started the company, I looked everywhere for, surely someone has an OCR engine already built to read tax returns. I mean, what does the IRS do? Are they keying all that stuff in by hand? Like, where is this stuff? We looked everywhere and we couldn't find it. I really didn't anticipate having to build that. And that's been a challenge, a major challenge, and one that will always continue to be hard. One of the reasons we started with tax, and I think we'll stay with tax for a while, is at least the format of the document is standard. Whereas if we had started with reading life insurance, every company has a slightly different look to their documents, right? But even with the standard form, it's just the OCR has been very, very challenging. Another challenge has been just the data security piece. I mean, tax returns is a very secure, very personal document. So that's always going to be a battle that we're always trying to improve and make that much more locked down. I don't think this company could have existed 5 or 6 years ago, though, because without the technology that AWS has or some of these hosting companies around security, the public, I think, is more open to the idea of documents living in the cloud versus when, 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been unheard of, I think. I remember when my firm switched to a cloud-based CRM system and there were questions about, are we comfortable with this? I mean, there are names and social security numbers out there. And now I think people just realize that that's how it's going to be. And in fact, you can be more secure on the cloud if you do it right. Those are the two big hurdles. I also wish that there had been an API-based tax calculation engine. You would think that would exist out there too, but we've been building that as well. So I don't know, maybe that'll be my next company, is just like, they're all the people who are building these things. Why are they all building them from scratch instead of subscribing to some sort of API?
Well, look, I mean, you got Yodelay, right? I mean, InvestNet, Yodelay.
Yep.
The Yodelay piece, that was their whole business, right? Building all these APIs because for exactly what you're describing. This stuff is not going to be a one-time use. At some point in time, another company's going to come along and need to do OCR. They're going to need to do tax calculations and some other things. So why not have some off-the-shelf connectors, right? So the plugs that work, make it work. I love that, by the way, going back to one of the things you said, the concept of security, it's so important in this space. And because our audience is primarily fintech and financial services, it's always worth noting, right? Outside of your startup, as you're saying, Holistiplan has had a really, pretty smooth ride here so far. Most fintech startups, it's frustratingly slow because of adoption, because of the need for that security, right? So if you're selling into the enterprise in particular, they're going to put you through the ringer. They're going to want to make sure that the higher up you go, the more data security people they have, right? Going to go through everything with a fine tooth comb, not only in your app, but in your contract, right? Your SLA, service level agreement, really going to go through everything here. But I love the fact that you brought that up, because as much of a pain in the butt as that is, and I'm sure frustrating it can be, it is something that creates a moat, right? It's a barrier to entry and gives you, as a startup, some level of lock-in, right? Because very few companies are going to go through that level of pain in the butt, right? Yep. To get there. So you already had an expertise. You knew the space really well. You saw the problem firsthand. And then you had a bit of a passion, a mission to want to solve this problem. And so kind of putting all that stuff together, and then a commitment to go through that pain in the butt process with the security and so forth, really adds a level of security for your business, right? That you're not all of a sudden just going to get wiped off the map by another competitor coming in.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And financial advisors get the same thing. People don't talk about their money or their finances with anybody. And so once you make the leap of trusting a financial advisor with that information, that extremely personal information, you're unlikely, even if you're wildly unhappy with that financial advisor, because you've shared that information with them, there's so much investment in that relationship. Yeah, that's why a lot of people stay with advisors for a very long time, because you've trusted them with something so personal. And so I hadn't really thought about that, but that's interesting. Yeah, if once people are willing to trust us with their clients' tax information, which I think we earn, I think we do the work to make sure it is secure, then you're right. Like, if someone else comes along doing another Holistiplan sort of thing, they might just think twice. I've got this all here. I trust these guys. These guys have earned my trust. Do I really want to go and chase that other bell or whistle that these other people have?
Well, the other thing about it, I mean, this space, you've been in it for your whole career, as I have. Look at how many pieces of software are on an advisor's desktop or a financial planner's desktop that the software has been around for 20 plus years. Legacy software is a big deal in this space, because exactly what you just said. Hey, look, I know it works. I can trust it, right? So I know it meets all my security needs, and all that vetting process has happened. But then, frankly, it's like we're all creatures of habit. And I think financial planners and financial advisors, a little more so than others, because for many of them, it's a lifestyle business. They build it to a good size. And so for some, a good size is $200,000 a year. Some a good size is, $600,000, $700,000 a year, whatever that number is. And then of course, there's a few outliers who want to build a really big enterprise scale RIA or whatever. But once you get into that lifestyle, like you say, hey, look, whatever helps me maintain this lifestyle and play my couple of rounds of golf a week and, take Fridays off or whatever their version of the lifestyle is. Yeah, just keep that going. Just keep that going.
Yeah, I think that might be true. But there is a change though. There is a change happening, and you are seeing little products like Holistiplan starting to bubble up. I think software as a service is really radically changing across all industries, but even in our enterprise market, the idea that you can buy a product that does a niche thing within your business. You said I worked in this business my whole career. Actually, in my 20s, I was in the energy business and I was doing enterprise software implementations. And back then we would buy, the companies would buy these big $2 million, huge SAP type things, and you'd spend $1 billion to implement it. And now I don't know if it's the iPhone and the idea of apps or whatever it is, but I do see higher adoption rates of smaller products. You know what I mean? And so the challenge then is stitching them all together in a way that works. And there seems to be more appetite for that. I agree with you that there's certainly firms who are like, look, I'm not into that, but there seems to be, as a new generation of advisors comes up, more appetite for building a tech stack out of many products and then stitching them together, using integrations, using some automations, which is very positive for a firm like ours, because we're able to be nimble, unlike some of the established players who may have been there for 20 years and they're just kind of a little more worried about their margins or continuing their maintenance contracts versus innovating. That's my hope, at least.
I tend to agree with you, by the way. I've talked to many, many advisors who are starting to use a variety of newer solutions to get leaner, a little more efficient, and bring the cost down, obviously. And I remember a few years ago talking to an advisor who is based in San Diego, and he's like, yeah, man, I'm using Dropbox and this and that. And that was kind of a new thing. Like 5 or 6 years ago, no advisors really weren't trusting some of that cloud-based infrastructure stuff. I wonder if there's a demographic shift, right? If you are a younger advisor, like sub 45, you're probably really comfortable with a lot of these techs, right? The tech has been coming into your life as you've entered the workforce, right? Because anybody who's under 45 has always had the internet in their life, in their entire adult life. But if you're an advisor who's 65, you got your start when if computers existed, but a lot of the stuff was on the phone. A lot of it was in person. A lot of it was paper-based, and you just developed a little bit of comfort level there. And some of them, are more tech savvy than others. But I wonder if there's a demographic thing in what you're seeing. It'd be interesting to see the adoption, what the client roster looks like for you and the user base roster, what their average age is compared to the average age of the financial advisor population. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would check it. I mean, I think that's a good reason why, when we won that tech competition, it was the XY Planning Network, which is known for skewing a bit younger. I mean, they're called XY. They're primarily targeted at Generation X and Y advisors and clients. And I think it fits what they're trying to build. A lot of those firms in their tech stack, they're willing to start with a clean slate and they're willing to try new things. And so that's been really good for us.
I love it. So speaking of winning competitions, winning awards, Holistiplan is nominated for a Global FinTech Award, the Benzinga Global FinTech Award. What category are you guys nominated for?
Yeah, that's right. It's in the Best New Product category. So
awesome. That's really cool. So how do people go about voting? I think you have it on your website, right? So people come to holistiplan.com and one of the sliders there, vote for us.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, if they go and watch that 2-minute video, they can see the product work. Right above it in our little carousel area is a link to vote on the Benzinga website.
Let's do it. Well, as you just kind of attested, with the XY Award experience, this could be a game changer and a needle mover, if you will, for a company. It gives, not only does it give them attention, but it gets more people, kind of adds a level of credibility to it, right? That other people said, hey, look, this is a really good idea. This is a solution that I'm using in my business. Hopefully some of the people who are voting for you are the people who use the product, and you're likely to see it drive adoption, right? It is another level of validation.
Absolutely.
A couple of weeks ago, I had Jason Raznick on the show, and he and I, we've been friends for years. And one of the topics of the show was the power of fintech events for startups. And some of the power is obviously what we just described, right? Like if you have the opportunity to present at a fintech event, or if it's an award experience like the Benzinga FinTech Awards, obviously participating, being nominated, and if you win, it does raise your profile. I know we're in pandemic, but how have you leveraged, if you have at all, in-person events or even virtual events for Holistiplan?
2020, we really expected to be on the road a lot. I mean, this was kind of the year when we figured that would be our primary way of marketing the company and getting the word out. And obviously, we haven't been to any events this year. And a few virtual events, we try to see the silver lining, which is at least we can't be outspent at an event by someone else because there's no event. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you'll go to like an exhibit hall and your startups off in the corner and the big guys with their beanbag chairs and cool stuff they're giving away. Well, we have a level playing field right now because we're all in the same, there's no exhibit hall right now. We've just had to go back to email marketing, word of mouth marketing, do a lot of stuff through webinars. That's how we've had to drive traffic. And it'll be interesting. Someone will write a paper for a business school case study a few years from now on what was the right way to approach 2020 in terms of marketing. But it definitely turned out differently than we expected, because we definitely expected to be participating in a lot of those types of events, industry events, and it just didn't happen. Didn't happen at all. Think about scaling a company in a time when you can't bring people into the same office. We're hiring people and bringing people on the team, and we can't meet them in person. We can't do an onboarding. In fact, yesterday was the first time we've had more than 2 people in the company in the same room at the same time. So, it's just been a crazy year for all that stuff.
That's amazing. It is really weird to put that in perspective. You think about it. I mean, for a company like yours, fast growing, you're meeting people via Zoom and phone call and text, I'm sure. And that is really strange, right? You don't even get to get the quirks of like what's somebody like in the office.
We're trying to build a corporate culture and things like that. And, these are things that everyone talks about when in startup land, but we're having to build it and we're not in the same place. And we have a new hire that no one has met in person ever. And I don't know when it's ever going to happen, even though we're in the same town. So it's bizarre.
Well, look, hopefully you made a good decision. And if you didn't, you'll find somebody else.
I think so. And Slack's been fun. And you find ways to make it work. People are people.
So, it's interesting. You said something that I found very kind of powerful. And I hope other startup founders who are listening to this kind of find inspiration in as well. As you're not going to be outspent at the events, right? And attention in many ways is easier to get now. I would also argue because many of these larger firms and more established firms are in chaos, right? Their business was built on those events. They're having people come to big, expensive offices. And so in many of those companies, they're kind of like, there's a little bit of frozen in fear, right? Because if you're at a big established company, usually the management teams at those companies, they weren't the founders of those firms, right? They're employees and they're on that traditional career path. They don't have the same risk profile, the same high energy, the same mission-driven mindset that a founder like yourself would have. Right now is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of that, kind of catch them while they're sleeping. They are sitting on a lot of money that they usually would spend on travel and events. I don't know what they're spending it on, but obviously it's not going there. This is a great opportunity for you to host your own virtual events, do a podcast like we're doing now, webinars and all the to get people's attention. There's a lot of clear sailing there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So those of us who have the ability to be scrappy are going to be able to create more opportunities in this time. One thing I've noticed also is our potential customers, our prospects, are much more willing this year than they were ever before to drop in on, say, a Zoom meeting or a webinar. And so a lot of our process this year has been email marketing, driving people to webinar type events, which I just don't know if people would have had the appetite to go to that sort of stuff, say in 2019 or before. And I'm just amazed every week at the numbers who show up for these webinars. But I think it's because we're more conditioned to do webinars now. We know how the technology works. We're used to looking at our screen. We have webcams and headsets now that we maybe didn't all have. So that's really surprised me too, how well that's been working. And I don't know, Zoom fatigue is going to set in eventually, I think, but we'll see when it happens. That's been surprising to me as well. It's not just how we spend our money, but how much appetite there is to actually take part in some of this content.
You know what I love about you just talked about there, and it reminds me of something. I think I did a podcast on this. Yeah, I did. I did a podcast over at Truelytics on their Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Many people have some assumptions that are based on the fact that they don't use a certain technology. So when it comes to social media marketing, as an example for a financial firm, many times you talk to a senior executive who might be in his 60s or upper 50s about using social media marketing. You'd be like, I don't know about Facebook. And they'll kind of brush it off. Part of the reason why they brush it off is they don't use that tech, right? They themselves don't use it. And because they don't use it, they have a hard time processing the notion that other people do. When it comes to this type of stuff too, video conferencing and jumping on a podcast, same thing. Some of these executives are like, they're downplaying podcasts, even though the stats show that 100 million Americans listen to podcasts regularly. Yep. And so chances are everyone a lot of them are listening to podcasts. It's happening, whether you do it or not. It's easier to get executives on podcasts now. It's easier to get executives on a Zoom, not only because they have the time, but they've been forced to get comfortable with it. And they've been forced to think about the world a little bit differently because they're not in the office either. So in closing this thing out, my favorite part of the show, what is your ask of the listener? As I teed up for you yesterday to give you a little bit of warning, anybody who comes on the show, there should be something you want from the audience. We're hoping that you and Holistiplan become wildly successful. I think it's a really, really cool thing. So how can the audience help?
Somewhere out there is some brilliant optical character recognition researcher who's inspired by the idea of helping people get access to financial planning. Maybe they'll be interested in coming to work with us. Our next chapter of growth is going to be at the enterprise level. We already got a list of people we're talking to, but it's a matter of closing those deals. And that's a whole different type of sales cycle and a different expertise than what we traditionally have within our firm. And I guess if someone's inspired by what I described today and they have a proven track record selling into the BDs or the big national RIAs, I'd be interested in hearing from you and talking about how we bring something like Holistiplan to impact thousands and thousands more people across the country.
Love it. Well, Roger, I will really want to give you a hearty thank you for joining me today. I know we took up a lot of your time, but it's really great having you on the show.
Happy to do it. It's interesting to tell your own story sometimes because you learn a few things every time you tell it.
Awesome. And you taught me a few things today. I love it. All right, buddy. Well, I really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the SoFin Podcast. It's always an honor to have you with us. Please do keep those suggestions for guests and topics coming in. You can just reach out to me at mike@finsermarketing.com or I'm at Mike Langford, pretty much everywhere. I really like the suggestions. Many of the guests that are coming up actually came from you, the audience. And what's really interesting is we saw the same effect with the SoFin at South by Southwest event, right? once you put on an event and there's lots of attendees and they see some high quality startups on stage, word gets out, right? And people start to get it. They're like, hey, this is an audience that's worth getting in front of. And this is something that's worth participating in. And we're seeing the same effect here with this podcast and with the podcast network. So I'm starting to see people reach out with startups that love to have on this show. And then maybe it's also appropriate for them to be on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. And this is what we're planning on doing with that network. So as I mentioned in the mid-roll, if you're interested in having your show on this network, having us produce a show for you, please do reach out, because the more we get in here, the better it's going to be for everybody. And you'll see scenarios where we had, as an example, Matt Reiner was on the SoFin podcast, and he was also on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. We'll almost certainly get Roger Pine over on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, get people on the Advisor Financing Forum, and so on and so forth. Love to talk to you about your podcast and have you benefit from that, because we're seeing really good results for the companies that we're producing podcasts for, and we're seeing good results here, and it's going to grow over time, right? The people who are listening now and to stick, and the people who come on next month as listeners stick, and it just grows, it accumulates over time. You know how it works. Network effect in full effect. Like I said, it's niche marketing like a boss. Okay. Huge thanks to Roger Pine for being with us today. Holistiplan is really cool. I love that OCR innovation. It's really neat, and it's really crazy awesome when you see somebody, again, make the pivot in their career because they saw the need for it. They actually experience it, and they are not afraid to roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty in the code, as you heard Roger talk about. So super crazy awesome. I loved it. Okay. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please do make sure you're wearing your mask, keeping your distance, and staying safe and healthy. We want you here for the next show. Okay. In the meantime, be nice to each other. Okay. You know how I feel about this. We all need it. Be kind. You'll feel better. We'll all get through this together. Okay. We will see you next week on the SoFin Podcast. See ya.